They were the most successful warriors in history. They conquered the greatest empire the world had ever seen. In their brutal grasp, they held it together for more than 1,000 years. It's a saga of proud men and almost unending triumph. It's the story of the conquest of empire. One of the greatest rivalries of all time is about to explode into battle. Two men stare each other down. Two empires hang in the balance. 20,000 men will die by the sword. The Roman army is preparing to face the first true threat to its survival, the ancient empire called Carthage. Their leaders are two of the greatest military strategists who ever lived. The fearsome African called Hannibal, and the bold young Roman named Scipio. Whatever its outcome, their contest will change the face of the world for all time. The Second Punic War, Rome versus Carthage, has reached its final crisis. It's a confrontation centuries in the making. The Roman legions have been a formidable fighting machine since their earliest days. How an amateur army from a minor city grew into a force capable of conquering the world is one of the ultimate success stories of history. In the early years, Rome was a democratic republic, its military an army of citizens. For centuries, it was the proud duty of every land-owning Roman to serve in the name of the eternal city.
The citizen militia was a true state army. It was an army that was rationalized along lines of wealth and age. And as best we can tell from our study of ancient history, this was the first army that was literally built into the state as part of the fabric of the state.
Even though these citizen soldiers were not professional fighting men, they were the best trained forces the world had ever seen.
They seem to have been born with weapons in their hands. Never did they take a break from their training. Their maneuvers are like bloodless battles, and their battles blood-stained maneuvers. Victory comes sure and certain. Josephus.
In the early centuries, Romans claimed their warfare was mostly defensive, that they were only protecting themselves against their enemies, real or perceived. It didn't matter that they often won new territories. Romans insisted expansion wasn't their primary goal.
Rome has been accused of following a policy of defensive aggression. And by that, it's often meant that the Romans feared an enemy on their borders. Fearing attack, they would preemptively attack this enemy, defeat them, and annex their territory. Once you've done that, of course, on the far side of this newly conquered territory, you would find new enemies on your borders, and you might fear them. And so thus you're compelled to continually advance your borders to, in your own mind, preemptively deter an aggression against your own state.
It was an accidental empire, and yet Romans found themselves engaged in almost constant warfare. In battle after battle, Romans came away victorious, and Rome's influence was growing fast. Back in the 5th century BC, Rome was little more than a smudge on the map. Over the next 2 centuries, Rome conquered most of central Italy. Besides constant fighting and training, there were other keys to the success of this young army. The genius of the Roman war machine was rarely the invention of new weapons or tactics. Rather, just as they would in art and technology, Romans stole the military innovations of others, brilliantly.
They didn't look for what today we'd call a silver bullet, the one single weapon system that would guarantee them success on the battlefield, or one tactic that would guarantee them success. What they looked for was to treat battle holistically, not just as a clash of technologies, but a clash of leadership, of will, of training, discipline, technology, politics. What they were a body of soldiers who always picked the best. And they weren't ashamed to pick the best from their enemies.
From the Greeks, Romans took most of their early weapons and armor, like traditional round shields and hoplite thrusting spears. From the Gauls, a long javelin called a pilum, which they could throw 100 feet, along with larger oblong shields and chainmail armor. And from the nearby Etruscans, Rome copied the basic organization of her military, the legions of roughly 5,000 men each. The Romans knew how to find an edge anywhere they could.
The Roman army, with few exceptions, was always well-fed and healthy. Now, in an age of muscle-powered armies, where physical strength determines your dominance over an enemy, being healthy and being rested and well-fed would be today like having a weapons overmatched against an enemy in a firepower battle. It was very important.
Another secret to Rome's success was extreme, unflinching discipline. If any soldier deserted or ran from battle, his entire unit faced brutal punishment. 1 in every 10 men was beaten, stoned, or flogged to death. Every Roman soldier knew retreat was never an option. It was a policy that often made the difference between victory and defeat. In the eyeball-to-eyeball combat of the ancient world, retreat was almost always the wrong move. 2 men armed with swords and shields find it surprisingly difficult to seriously wound or kill each other. Until, that is, one of them turns and runs. It's far easier to stab an enemy's unprotected back and sides. And so, the bloodiest slaughters occurred when an army panicked, turned their backs, and ran. Thanks to their unwavering discipline, the great Roman legions just didn't panic. By 260 BC, Rome controlled more than 52,000 square miles, the entire Italian peninsula south of the Po River, and she would not stop here. Rome's reach across the map was now bumping elbows with another, much older empire, Carthage. This powerful empire controlled much of North Africa, Spain, Sicily, and Sardinia. First settled by traders from what is now Lebanon, the city of Carthage was founded in 814 BC, before Rome was even a collection of mud huts. Called the Great Jewel of the Mediterranean, Carthage was rivaled by no other city on earth, least of all young Rome. Little is known about the Carthaginians, who left behind almost no written record. What is known comes from archaeological finds and stories passed down by the Greeks and Romans. But one scrap of evidence about Carthage overshadows all others, a bizarre ritual that struck even the Romans as utterly barbaric. The god Baal Hammon demanded human sacrifice from the ancient Africans. Carthage gave him her children. In a sacred ceremony, A priest lifted up the child, strangled him to death, then burned the small body in a ritual fire. These carved stones mark the graves of sacrificed babies. There are thousands near Carthage. Hundreds of children at a time were killed in the desperate attempt to bring rain in times of drought or repulse an enemy in times of war. Romans claimed that child sacrifice was the root